this is a fun part. And
I like to talk with my hands, so hopefully.
And that's okay. James does too, so you can do whatever you want with your hands. That's fine.
I'm used to presenting, so I'm like.
That's okay. No problem. Half the people aren't even going to watch this anyways. They just listen to it. But regardless, we are rolling. Thanks for hanging out with me today. Guys, welcome back to the Silver Bolt Podcast. We are on number 13. I screwed up last week. I said we were still on number 11, but anywho, it doesn't matter. I am happy that today we finally get to do... I've actually had a lot of emails from people being like, when are you guys going to get into your special application stuff? You know, where you're talking about how you work with your members, and, you know, we talked about it, calling it the 38 special, this and that, just, you know, kind of talking about individual circumstances, where we started, where we were at, and kind of what the goal was and how we went about achieving the goal. And so Emily here was one of the first ones that I knew I wanted to get on because of a number of different reasons, and I'm not going to try to boost you up here or anything, but from a nutritional standpoint, you and I just got done working with each other on a very particular project.
Yes.
And it ended very well in my mind.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Agreed? Okay. So there's a lot of things that I think people can learn from your situation, where we decided to go, how we decided to go about it, and kind of the timeline we put on it. Because I think a lot of people in today's age, they're like, you know, I want to lose body fat. I want to achieve a certain percentage body fat or whatever. Mm-hmm. But there's no timeline. There's no structure. Mm-hmm. People would rather just be extreme than be consistent. You were very consistent. Okay, and I think people should know about that. So before we get too far into here, first off, kind of introduce yourself, what you do, where you're from. You know, because we have people from, like, I was looking on the demographic thing on our podcast host, and it's like we have some people from Belgium.
Wow.
That have listened to every episode.
That's a fun reach.
Thanks, people.
Yeah.
That's cool. So yeah, so go ahead and introduce yourself, kind of tell me a little bit about you, or tell people a little bit about you.
Yeah, so my name is Emily Smoot. I've been a member of Reclaim now for a little over 3 years. I started right after I got the go-ahead after I had my son. And so 6 weeks after I had him, I started in August. So yeah, right at 3 years now. And, you know, prior to coming to Reclaim, I really didn't have a set skill, I would say, at health. You know,
it's a good way to look at it.
My occupation is in sales. So a good amount of my time throughout the day is spent across the table from somebody. And that might start with a full-blown breakfast with somebody and then turn around a couple hours later having a full-blown lunch. So much of it was encompassed by food and not necessarily the right food. And so I have learned so much at my time at Reclaim, and just making sure that my goal for not only myself but my family is more focused on health. And there's been so many steps that we've taken, but I am a goal-oriented person, and so after I've reached certain things that I've learned within Reclaim, certain achievements of goals that I'd set for myself, you know, I'm always looking for that next thing to be working towards, and so that's what led us to this.
Yeah. So, were you here before I got here?
I think we started right around the same time.
Yeah. So it would have been
August
17.
August of 17.
Yeah, so I was down here, I moved down here March of 17 because my daughter was born a couple months later in June. I didn't start working with Reclaim until shortly after she was born. So I was just working out here. But anywho, so our timeline was kind of similar to how long we've been here. And we were kind of in the learning process of everything of how Reclaim works as far as the facility. But I got to kind of see how you grew in this. And it was obviously fun. There's no doubt that, you know, you and Seth, both your husband, have very strong work ethics and how you do things. And so that was one of the things that, you know, obviously you're my kind of people. Like, I want to work with you because I know that if I gave you a task, it'd probably just be head down, nose to the ground, and go. So when did we start our specific thing? That would have been...
We started right at the beginning of May, correct. I want to say.
Yeah. So we are talking right post shutdown. When we were able to get back into the gym, we decided that we were going to start offering, and it was more of a thing that I did during the COVID time. For a lot of people, we were shut down. We lost a lot of things, and I'm very fortunate that I was able to obviously stay on board with my company, but I was able to do some proactive things, and one of those things was doing some further education into nutrition guidance. Okay, and I decided that I was going to offer to people on a very small scale. I only had like 6 or 7 people that I was working with, this dynamic nutrition coaching. Okay, and when I was going through a lot of my schooling, there was a lot of different outside influences that I was not taking into consideration when I was thinking about nutrition. Usually we think about, macronutrients, protein, carbs, fats, and that's it. And while there are plenty of people out in the world that can handle just a macronutrient prescription, a lot of people fail to understand the outside influences like stress and sleep and work schedule and workout timing and food timing and all those different things. Most people, it's like, here's your macronutrient prescription, just make sure you hit those macros and you're good. Okay, I wanted to go 10 steps beyond that. And you were one of the first people that was like, yeah, I want in on this job, okay, this goal. So essentially kind of tell me exactly what led you to want to do something like this. And you can take it as far or as shallow as you want, really, but to provide a little context as to why someone would have been like, yeah, that's something I probably would have wanted to do.
I saw in not only my performance, but I had, initially my goal when I approached you was a body fat loss goal. And, getting into it, it turned into so much more, but that was the initial goal.
Sure.
And
you gotta have an initial goal to start anything.
Yeah. So, I had hovered, around a respectable body fat percentage, but my goal was to get below 20%. And I only had a few to drop to get there, but I had been plateaued for over a year, over a year. And when I think back through it, so call it a year ago around this time, I really started to initiate some fasting into what I was doing for my body. In my mind, I was thinking, okay, not only am I going to be doing some things that are really good from a gut health quality perspective, but it's going to help me meet that body fat loss goal. You think that in your mind. Learning now wasn't necessarily the right thing, but so I started that, and at the time, kind of with our training here at the gym, we were doing a lot of high intensity training. I remember at that point in time, there was a board that you all had up, and we were reaching to see if we could increase our 5,000 meter row.
Yeah.
Could we do this? Could we do that?
Yeah.
And I am such a goal-oriented person that every time I'm reaching for more and more and more. And in my mind, I could do more, but my body was saying, you're done.
Right.
And so I felt like my body was failing me there, and I wasn't meeting my goals. And then we switch over at the beginning of the year, and we're going into this hypertrophy training. And even still, I'm not, we're supposed to be gaining lean mass, which therefore in my mind tells me I should be leaning out some also. I'm not getting that result.
Sure.
Then we get into March and we start getting into quarantine, and I fast even more because that was my way of making sure I kept myself in check from a nutrition perspective. Being at home 24/7, that was not the lifestyle I was used to.
Right.
Being in my kitchen all the time, being around the kitchen table, doing schoolwork with my daughter. I wanted to go to the pantry. And so incorporating fasting was, honestly at the time,
made sense.
It made sense. And I wasn't training hard either. We were very limited on what we were able to do during quarantine. So during that time, I could probably look back and say it made sense, but maybe not to the extent that I was taking it.
Well, this is one of the things, another dynamite reason why I wanted you to have on here first is because we did a podcast 2 episodes ago, I believe, where we were talking about different, dieting techniques or different types of diets and kind of what they're meant for and why somebody would choose to go with them, And one of our faults as far as, teaching to our broad audience at Reclaim is taking our general demographic, the most people, what do the most people need? And a lot of the people of our facility need, especially as they come into our facility, they need some inflammation management, really. That can be done through changing a lot of your food, but Intermittent fasting can be more restrictive than anything, and sometimes that restriction can be super beneficial. It gives your gut that rest and digest time that it needs. Okay, it shouldn't just be constantly fed to the point where it's overworked and doesn't have a chance to do anything with the nutrients that you have. That's usually what we see with a lot of people. So when we're like, hey, fasting can have all these great benefits as far as cellular autophagy and helping your body, become a little bit more insulin sensitive and all those things like that triggers in, people's minds like you, like, oh, that's something I need to do. And you're not necessarily wrong. But, as we were talking in the podcast a couple weeks ago, a lot of people essentially get to the point where they check off one thing and just like you said, what's the next thing I can work towards? Well, when I think of fasting, I think of health metrics. Okay, you are trying to fast for health reasons. Okay, and it can be super beneficial. But you in a performance style of training. Okay, and a lot of our training that we do is all relative intensity, meaning you can go at it as hard as you need. You don't have an on-off button, or you have an on-off button. That's it. You don't really have a regulator that says, "Hey, we pull it back." So, in my mind, watching you initially go through that type of training, I could see there was a little bit of a disconnect for what your body was able to do versus what you wanted to do. And so that was the approach that we needed to realize that, okay, what is your body physically telling you that it can do? Why can't it do more like you think it should be able to? And how can we start to change things to put you in a better position so that way your body can essentially lose more body fat? So it was interesting when we first started because, yeah, you had your initial goal. I can't remember exactly where you were floating around, but it's like, I can't get below X mark.
Yeah, it was right at 22, and I'd been there for a long time.
Yeah, and in most people's cases, and don't get me wrong, it's a super healthy body fat percentage, but in your mind is like, I know I can do it. I want to see that I can do it. And I want to know how to do it. And I'm like, I'm down with it. Let's go. Let's figure it out. Okay. And so initially a lot of everything that we did was, and I think you had a little bit of a different style of fasting than most people did because you fasted in the evening rather than in the morning.
Correct.
Right. So kind of explain that because you were somebody who works out in the morning. That's kind of an important aspect of this to note as well.
Yeah, I do. So 6 a.m. is my workout time. I usually am done around 7:15. After that, I would even then start my intake for the day and hopefully be done around 1. That's what I was doing. And
that was going to be your feeding window.
It was my feeding window. Right. And, I think another important thing to note is when I was consuming, it was high quality food.
Oh, yeah. You ate really well.
It was the quantity that was just completely lacking and the ratio of which the quantity was being consumed. And so, I think that was what was so frustrating to me was I was putting in the hard work. I was doing the fasting. I was eating really clean. I've tried to be a good student and listen to everything that I've been told and implement it, and I'm like, I'm so stuck.
Right.
And that's why I was like, there's something I'm missing here.
Yeah, and nobody is at fault for that because, honestly, we're at fault for that because we just kind of painted with a broad brush across the board of what people should essentially do for a certain, and maybe we just didn't, specify as far as like, look, if you're trying to control inflammation, and even if you're in a performance metric, like we're all trying to control inflammation, like fasting seems like a really good deal. And there are people out there, no doubt, that can train at a very high level and fast really well, but we don't know a lot about that person, okay? And so we don't know what that person's, work life is, what their stress life is, what, how their body responds to cortisol, how they sleep, how they recover. Like we don't know any of those things. We just see the benefit, essentially on Instagram and be like, that's what I need to do.
Yeah.
But there's a lot more variables that you need to consider. So that's initially where we started. You were somebody who fasted, somebody who worked out in the morning, and usually if you're somebody who fasts intermittently on the opposite scale where you are fasting through the morning and you don't break your window till 1, 2 o'clock and then you eat until 7 or 8, I would venture to say that 6 a.m. workouts don't fit you very well because of the need for recovery. And this is one of the first topics that you and I talked about was, I appreciated that you ate immediately after your workout and then cut your window short later in the evening, but it cut you short for what you're going to have available for the workout the next day. And you're a 4 or 5 times a week, 6 a.m. in the morning, like your body needs the things to recover for that next morning, right? On the opposite of that, if you only eat in the evening all the way until you go to bed, you might still have some possibility to replenish glycogen stores and carbohydrates and whatnot for your workout the next morning. But most people, especially if you eat very, very clean, you don't have very much in the tank.
No.
And then trying to recover immediately after that workout is essentially done.
Well, and to just completely snowball everything, I not only was only eating in a shortened period of time, but I was eating things that weren't very high in carbohydrates.
Right.
I was very high fat at that point in time. I ate a lot of vegetables, but they were more in the form of broccoli, Brussels sprouts, spinach, your lower carb vegetables.
For sure.
And that wasn't it's so different now. So that's been really good.
Well, and that was, that's essentially part two. So essentially to kind of kickstart how we got started, the first thing that, I needed to know was more about you. Okay. And so we started with an intake form that went through a series of questions similar to like what you'd fill out if you went to the doctor's office.
Yep.
Like, there's something I need to know, deep in your history that would tie to the things that are happening now. Possibly, not always the case, but sometimes it's just possible to know those things. And you can pick up a lot of information just based on, how many hours of sleep do you usually have? Do you stay asleep? What are your female menstrual cycles? Stuff like that can be super beneficial, stupid fly, to helping somebody understand, where's the biggest kink in your armor that we need to address first. Anyways, we went through a lot of the things that you had, and the first thing that we noticed was that there are two important factors here. One, you considerably underate for the window that you had, and this is very common because fasting is a restricted thing, but for most people to try to make up their calories in a given day within a small window, if you naturally don't eat very much anyways, like you're almost 100% behind the 8 ball. And we need calories for everything. Everything you do requires some kind of calorie expenditure, some kind of caloric load. So we noticed, one, that you underate. I want to say I had it written down that you were pretty close to like 800 or 900 calories on average, lower than what your body wanted it to be.
Yeah, that's
right?
probably accurate.
And the other thing was, yes, you don't consume carbohydrates. And this is one of the main topics that I have to cover with everybody that I work with now is, carbs aren't necessarily the enemy unless you have some kind of metabolic condition that would require you not to. You're in decent shape. And I would say decent very loosely. You're in good shape. You work extremely hard, and I can't remember how many podcasts ago, we talked about energy systems. The type of training we do demands carbohydrates. And if you don't have carbohydrates based on what you consume, your body will go find, by its own means, create carbohydrates via your muscle protein.
Yep.
Via a very commonly talked about hormone called cortisol. And so one of the first things that we decided was like, okay, we're going to implement a reverse diet strategy here. I'm essentially going to take away your fast. You're going to start eating carbohydrates in small doses until we get you back up into a very specific caloric value. And then from there, we're going to start to monitor biofeedback. And so biofeedback is one of the best tools. I am going to kill this fly. Biofeedback is one of the best tools. I missed. Biofeedback is one of the best tools to use to learn what the next step should be. Okay? And when I say biofeedback, I'm talking about things like anxiety, stress, sleep, mood, bowel movements, anything, it seems very weird, but everything that happens in your body is a physiological response to something. Even when you are hungry and your stomach growls, that's a physiological response to something. Okay, headaches, anxiousness, night sweats, stuff like that. Those are all biofeedback markers, and these are things that we cover essentially every day. Like, give me some biofeedback. What's happening? What do you notice? And from there, like, especially when we started, if I remember right, you didn't sleep very well, did you?
I would be okay, but if I ever really broke eating what I would call what was the norm back then, I would sleep terrible. And it still happens to me sometimes because my body's like, what are you doing to me?
For sure.
I would eat in a surplus and heavy carb at the time my body wasn't used to, and sure. I would always wake up and tell Seth that next morning I was an inferno last night. Like, I couldn't sleep. It was awful. And so and sleep was something we had put a large focus on. Again, just trying to reach those goals, knowing that is so important for recovery. We were focused towards getting at a minimum of 7 hours of sleep.
Sure. That's my focus. If I can get 7 hours on dynamite.
Yeah. And I can remember, that was one of the best things about working with Colton was he was so focused on how are you recovering and what are your biofeedback markers. That was the first priority, and it's something that I was so appreciative of because health has to come first. Yes, I had this body fat percentage loss goal.
Talk about that all the time.
But health still has to come first. And so I can remember we were probably 5 days to a week into it, and I'd been eating in this surplus, and I'm talking like
surplus because she was used to being in a fast.
Yeah.
So yes, the body was not used to having that increase of calories.
Yeah,
but
I think we were 2,100 or something like that at this point. I mean, it wasn't outrageous, but for me, it was definitely a surplus. And he called me one morning and he said, "How are you doing?" And I said, "Oh my gosh, I slept so good last night. I woke up in a fog and I didn't even know what was going on."
Yeah.
And it was the best feeling. At that point was when I first started feeling more recovered and like I had just more in my tank to give.
What were some other biofeedback things that we had to address initially?
That was probably sleep was one, stress, which and work environment even to this day is still a little different for me because of everything going on. But managing stress, I work in agriculture, and so we were gearing up to go into planting season and managing through that.
Had that first frost to come.
Yeah, and
that put a little kink in our plans.
Yeah, frost and lots of stress around that. So, just making sure that we're keeping all those things in check to where everything else can naturally fall into place.
I think the stress management was probably the other one that we really had to focus on.
Mm-hmm.
And it wasn't just because like, hey, you're stressed out, I gotta get you to chill. It wasn't that. It was the understanding of what stress presents to the body in the form of cortisol management. Mm-hmm. Like, stress is a good thing. You need stress. Cortisol is a great hormone. It has to function well. It's still the only hormone that will result in you not dying when you get ready to step on a snake. Like, it has all those good properties, but if it is just not regulated well, there's all kinds of problems. Okay. And so the other things, obviously your work life can create stress. Sometimes family life can create stress. Mm-hmm. Working out is stress. Okay. Most people are like, oh, it's good stress, but it's still stress that you have to be able to manage and recover from. And so there's one macronutrient that can mitigate the effects of cortisol, and that's carbohydrates. I always laugh at people when they're like, how is that possible? You just think about it, okay? When you are stressed out at night, what do you reach for when you get the hankering for something? You don't reach for an avocado, you reach for some kind of carbohydrate, because the carbohydrate is going to mitigate the level of cortisol that is in your system, and especially at night, it's going to kickstart your body's sleep cycle, because cortisol works totally opposite of your sleep hormone. Okay, cortisol is the highest in the morning, your sleep hormone is the lowest in the morning. That's how you get out of bed. It is the opposite, or it should be the opposite in the evening. Cortisol should be at its lowest and your sleep hormone should be at its highest. But if cortisol is elevated in the evening, your body's naturally going to start sending signals to figure out how are we going to get this down. It's why people have night, hankerings for stuff all the time. Okay, so now it's like, okay, how during the course of the day, if I know that cortisol is supposed to be going down, especially since you work out in the morning,
right?
Like your hormone should be the highest cortisol anyways in the morning. It should have no problem going down. How can we look at your day and figure out how to get cortisol moving down before you go to sleep? That was like one of the very first things that we needed to work on. And I think we started to really talk about, timing as a very, very, very large factor into this process.
Correct.
Okay? Because you were very not a carbohydrate eater. I don't know the best way to say that. So initially I was like, look, you're going to be consuming 250 grams of carbohydrates a day and you're used to having none. Your body's going to freak out. Mm-hmm. Like, we have to make sure that when we consume the carbohydrates that it's at a very needed point during the day.
Yeah.
And so when cortisol was highest and insulin sensitivity was the highest, that's when we were going to strike. Okay. Mm-hmm. So you're talking immediately after a workout. Insulin sensitivity is high. You just got done burning a lot of carbohydrates. It's time to put the fuel back into the tank so that way it can kickstart protein synthesis, all this fun stuff. And then later through the day it became, okay, now when is stress gonna come up? and how do we eat around that, okay? And don't confuse this for stress eating. It's just identifying, especially you have a very well thought out schedule. You know good and well when you're going to have stress throughout the day. How can I eat around that to mitigate the chance of cortisol rising too much, right? And that was a major point of emphasis. So we get, 5 or 6 weeks into it, right? And you called me. You said, we need to talk. And I said, I remember checking my phone. I was like, I know exactly what this is going to be about. You remember what the call was?
I felt like things were starting to go up.
Right. Go
Pants
ahead.
were fitting tighter. And not to the point where I wasn't changing pants sizes. My midsection was feeling fuller. Now, granted, to try to make sure I was getting in all these carbs, I was grabbing anything I could grab to hit my carb goal for the day. I was eating a lot of oats. I was feeling really bloated. There was just a lot of things, and I called Colton, and I'm like,
initially you were feeling, then it started to taper off a little bit.
Yeah, my body got used to it eventually, but I said, Colton, I'm not sure that we're headed the right direction here.
And see if you remember, what was my question to you immediately after you said that?
What are your biofeedback markers? How are you feeling?
And what did you say?
I feel great.
Okay. And then that was the end of the discussion. Okay. Essentially, anybody that goes on a reverse diet, you have to understand that this is something that can possibly happen, right? This reverse dieting, you're taking in a surplus of calories that your body hasn't been used to. And we'll kind of talk about exactly why this happens. But this is one of the things I was like, look, this may happen initially, and some people hate the idea of having to gain weight before you can lose weight, but you have to be in a deficit in order to have the chance to lose body fat, or at least change your composition, stay the same weight and lose body fat, but have the ability to gain muscle. So there were some very specific things that we had to talk about prior to starting, but as soon as I got that text, I'm like, I know exactly what's going to happen here.
It was interesting though, because even though I knew I had put on extra layers, I guess we could call it. It was there was still a transformation that was going on. I could see distinct differences, and those differences, I think, really at the end of the day, were muscle mass.
Oh, for sure.
I was taking a different shape in a good way, but it's still like
you have to have calories in excess in order to grow muscle, to grow anything.
Yeah, but at the end of the day, I was like, I don't know if I want to buy a new wardrobe. I just want to shed some body fat.
For sure. So yeah, you wanted to, I got that call and you're like, I just want to lose body fat. What the hell's going on? And I was like, just trust the process that's happening right now. You feel great. You're sleeping better than you ever have. Your workouts are dynamite. Like, you're killing it. Like, all of these things are happening in a good thing.
Yeah.
And this is going to be needed in order to put you in a deficit later.
Well, and I think it's important to mention too, it's easy to want to take a step back and be like, okay, maybe this isn't really what I wanted, but I had told myself when I started from day one, I was going to trust the process, and I was going to listen to what instruction you gave me, because and this is not my area of expertise.
Right.
So I was absolutely focused on taking your lead, and that's where I was like, okay, we'll just keep doing what we're doing.
And there's a big leap of faith in that, because if you go to any person who's like, yeah, I'm going to get you shredded, but first you're going to have to gain 5 pounds, they're going to be like, excuse me, what? So that was just a lot of the conversation that we had to have early on to make the understanding and the connection that this is something that's probably going to happen based on how you've been. Essentially what happens, and I've talked about this briefly on a couple of podcast episodes before, but if you specifically are in a caloric deficit for a long period of time, we're talking months to years, okay, your body becomes metabolically adapted to that amount of calories, or roughly around that calorie mark. But it doesn't change your body's basal metabolic rate, okay? Your basal metabolic rate takes into consideration all the muscle mass that you have on your body, on your skeletal body, and factors how much energy is needed to move all of it, and essentially how to create function in your body, just down to a cellular level, not just including muscles. On top of that, you have to calculate your activity. All right, that number, that BMR, doesn't account for how often you work out, what kind of workouts you do, how long are your workouts. So you have to factor in those and add that to your BMR, and that gives you something called your total daily energy expenditure. And essentially, we calculated yours to be at about 2,100 calories. And that is the calorie mark that if everything inside of you was working perfectly, you know, in homeostasis and everything was solid, you would need that calorie mark in order to maintain your body weight. But you were sitting at like 1,200, 1,300 on a daily basis. And so your body, after an extended period of time, is like, okay, this is all we're going to get. We get 1,200, 1,300 calories. It is essentially up to us to go make up that difference. And that's where cortisol comes in and helps. So in my mind, the reverse dieting technique is to take that calorie mark that you were consuming and get it closer and closer and closer to the actual 2,100 calories. And then from there, that's when you start to see all the biofeedback markers start to change. That's when you have the better hormone regulation, you have the better management of cortisol, you have better sleep, you have better energy throughout the day. Like, you know, some people it cracks me up that some people think it's normal that you should be tired at 2 p.m. I don't get that. And a lot of it can come down to not just what you eat, but how much you eat, you know? And so that was our initial goal. And we got to that mark and we stayed there for a while and we monitored your biofeedback and just to make sure that this is in fact where your body liked to be. And you did additionally gain like a pound or two at the beginning and you're like, I'm starting to feel it, I don't like it. But it tapered back off because it's like, oh, we actually have the calories we need for everything to work really well and work efficiently. And so from there it was, okay, now we introduce the cut. We take the calories away very slowly and methodically, and we continue to monitor your biofeedback and see how the body starts to respond. And if it starts to respond poorly, we go back. We go back to where it was, and then we work again. And so I want to say, because we set a timeline for 12 weeks.
Yes.
We said 3 months. Give me 3 months, and I can get you under that percentage. I want to say that it was week 9 or 10 that we had hit what number? 17 or 16%?
Yeah, we were, I think 18.1 is what I came in at. And it was right at 10 weeks because I remember we were sitting down and we still had 2 weeks left and you're like, so what do you want to do now?
Right. You're like, I want to see how far it can go, right?
Yeah.
And so, and we ended up knocking off another 1.5% by the end of the 12 weeks. So you started at 22 and ended up at like 17, but you completely smashed getting under the 20% mark like you wanted. And I had no doubt that it could happen. But you know, when we started introducing your cut at like week 6 or 7, I think it was incredible to see that, you know, I'm taking away calories from you. That's already stress to the body. The body doesn't like that, right? But all of your biofeedback was staying the same. It was staying stable. You were still sleeping well. You were recovering well. You had the energy. You had everything you needed in order to sustain what was happening. And that's perfect because that's what you need in order to continue that cut. So then from there, it was like, what did we ever get you down to as far as calories went? Did you ever get down to 1,500?
Yeah, I think the lowest was 1,560-ish.
Yeah, so keep in mind, we only cut about 100 to 150 calories a week, and it was very small, and we monitored it every step of the way. But when you finally got to that body fat percentage at 17%, you were still consuming about 350 calories more than what you were doing when you started.
Absolutely.
And that blows people's minds. But to truly understand why that was needed, you kind of had to go back to and understand, you know, physiologically what the body needed to get the biofeedback that was required.
Yeah.
So I thought it was a hell of a transformation, at least initially, because there were plenty of times that you had, you know, your hurdles you had to deal with.
Yeah.
Right? But you kept your head down and you kept doing it, and there was great conversation between you and I daily and then weekly on our calls, and then, you know, fine-tuning things. People hate the word fine-tuning, but it's like that's essentially all we did this entire time was fine-tune exactly what your body wanted based on what it was telling us. And so I don't know, what else did you pick out of this? Because I mean, I just kind of hit the apex of the conversation there, but like,
well, I think it's easy to focus on, you know, I remember sitting down, we were at week 10 and I'd scan, and it was funny, he threw a towel over the scanner so I couldn't see what it was. Honestly, this whole time, like, it was neat the way...
Because if you didn't hit it, I had 2 more weeks.
It was neat the way I was not scanning up to this point. You know, the last time prior to this scan was actually before the first of the year.
Right.
You know, I just decided I'm not getting on that thing.
But you were also in pretty good shape before we went into to COVID. So
correct.
we were going to use your already good shape.
Yeah, I knew my body enough to know I was probably still in that 22% window at that point in time. But when he handed me my scan, I was absolutely blown away. I never anticipated it to be what it was. I knew I felt good, but knowing how I had initially felt the thickness, and then we weren't too far from that thickness window and into my cut, and here we are. Like the cut was incredibly efficient. It blew my mind. But what I told him, I pointed at a number and I said, I'm excited for, and I pointed the body fat percentage, I'm excited for this, but I'm even more excited for this. My skeletal muscle mass skyrocketed. Mm-hmm. And so, having, everything, hindsight being 20/20, looking back now, that thickness I was feeling absolutely was muscle mass. I don't think I hardly put on any body fat during that process of increasing my calories.
I don't believe you did.
And it just, now having gone through it, and I know how to read my body, what am I feeling, how to adjust things. Like I said, my goal was body fat, but I gained so much more. We were going through a mini strength camp this summer, and my main lifts, all of them increased substantially. And, it all just goes back to feeding your body properly.
Right.
And now that I feel like I can successfully do them and my tank's not completely drained, now I can address where are some of my weaknesses, what's holding me back on even reaching higher up there. He and I had a conversation this morning. I know in my back squats, it's lower core strength. I've got to increase that if I'm going to keep climbing. It's not my lower body that's giving out on me. Right. It's my lower core strength. So now that I've got everything else in a line, I can start to assess and feel other things because I'm not just completely exhausted.
Right. And that is, we always want people to become their own health advocate, but you have to understand your body. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? You have to understand what, you might think is normal is obviously not normal, and understand, what healthy feels like first. From there, you can notice anything. Mm-hmm. You can notice the slightest change of anything and be able to make the adjustments for it. I think James and I were talking about that last week. It's just like, there's so many people that just don't understand what healthy really feels like. Yeah. And it's a shame, but, that's where our job comes in to try to help lead you guys to that at least understanding. So that way, if you can get a taste of what healthy feels like, you can assess your body in ways that no doctor or anybody with a white coat could ever do.
Oh, absolutely.
And that's a fun place to be. Mm-hmm. And yes, it did initially. You were like, I want to hit a body fat percentage, I want to do this, but then it became, I'm speculating, but I'd say you have a much better understanding of how your body works, what it needs, when it needs it. And not only, those, but why.
Yeah,
right?
Absolutely.
So, it was a cool experience. Obviously, I'm very proud of the way that you handled that, because a lot of the stuff that I challenged you with was just, look, this is what you got to do. You got to trust me, and you did. And that was good. Not everybody responds that way, and that's okay. Everybody's kind of a different personality type, and we work with that. But physiologically, your body doesn't care what personality type you are.
Right.
It needs these things. Mm-hmm. And the physiology is different in some instances for other people, but for the bulk majority, it's pretty cut and dry. Yeah. It's fine-tuning some of the very minute details to get your body to do what you want.
Yeah, not only that, but the feeling better. I can really push myself and still not be sore, as odd as that might sound. But it's because
soreness is not an indicator of a good workout, people.
Yeah, and so it's
a sign of lack of recovery.
I know that I'm recovering at that point. And so just this past Sunday, I looked up at my husband. I said, I think I just need to eat some carbs because I hurt. But
everybody wants to get to that part where I need some carbs, babe. I'm gonna go get some carbs.
But that is not the norm for me. Normally I am, ache-free, pain-free, and I just feel really good. And that's a good place to be. And then knowing that when I don't feel great, to give myself enough grace to say, okay, I know I need to feed myself, and to go do it without feeling guilty about it.
That hand dryer is very loud.
It is.
I've never had that go off on a podcast, but now I think I'm going to unplug it. No, that's a good conversation. That's why it's the reason I wanted you to be on here first, because I know that you had the success with it, and there was some bumpy things to start. You kind of went through the little bit of the process of it, but keep in mind this is a very quick, what I consider a very quick deal. It's 12 weeks. Okay, I'll have some people on here who they've done a little bit more of an extended variation of this, just to work on different areas that needed more attention. There are still people that I work with, with the understanding they're like, oh, I'm going to get a macro prescription from Colton or whatever, and they haven't gotten it yet. And there's things that they have to get done first, whether that is eating more calories or getting a better understanding of how much protein they consume beforehand, or getting more consistent with their workouts or anything like that, because not in good faith, I just can't give it to them and say that this is going to work. Okay. And I have a problem with that. And so it's just what you have to do. And so it's good for people to hear this, because it can be done. Right? I'm not just talking, blowing smoke at people. Like, it can be done. There's proof. Okay. So thanks for chatting with me. I know it's kind of impromptu, but thanks for chatting with me. I'm sure we'll have you or Seth or some other people on here, because I'm sure we'll run out of things to talk about. You need to come up with what you're doing now or something. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, thanks for having me. It's been fun.
Got any last second thoughts you want to put on here?
Just not to be afraid to, especially women, don't look at social media for guidance or any of that. I mean, so much of it is geared towards, you've got to cut this or you've got to fast this. Well, if you're really pushing yourself and you're really trying to get your result first and foremost from the gym, you have to eat and fuel yourself to then see the fruits of your effort. Like I said before, it was absolutely my mind wanting more and my body saying I can't. And so that, at the end of the day, came down to fuel. And now fuel is something that just give yourself grace and give it to yourself, because you need it if you feel like you need it.
You got to eat the fuel, not the food, right?
That's right.
Absolutely. Guys, thanks for hanging out with us on this podcast. Number 13, I think is what I said. We'll be coming back to you next week. I'm not sure exactly who we got or what topic we're on, but I'm sure we'll come up with something. For sure. All right. Thanks for listening, guys. This has been the Silver Bolt Podcast.